We were rappelling on the west slope of the Teton Mountains with a group of young men, 16 to 17 years old, just trying to teach them some life skills. We found an awesome cliff, set up our gear, went to the top. There were probably about 25 of us in this group, and we were there for the day. And the goal was to get as many young men down this cliff as many times as they would like to go, safely, securely, but in a way that they could tackle some of their greatest fears in life, right? We had one young man with us who is facing some major physical challenges in his life. He suffers from brain cancer. He's got a tumor on his brain, and it has grown to the point where it's affected his motor skills on the right side of his body. He doesn't have the functionality on the right side of his body like he once had. This is a hard story to watch because this is a young man that's always been very active and very competitive in various different sports and done well at them. And now he has to face this challenge in life where he can't do the things that he used to be able to do to the level that he once did them. We find ourselves at the top of this cliff. We see young men going over the cliff. This young man is no different from any of the others. He doesn't want to be treated differently. He doesn't want to be approached differently. He wants to have the same experience that everybody else has. So we hooked him up. His dad was there with us. We had a professional guide, very experienced in climbing and rappelling, who hooked up our gear. He was managing the entire experience for us. There are a couple others of us adults who were there to help the event take place. This young man's father was one of those adults. He says he's ready to go. We hook him up, put him in a harness. His dad walks him out to the edge. He leans back, doesn't even blink, and starts over the edge. Now, just to further paint the picture, his right leg, he has very little control over that leg. And as you go over a ledge, for anybody who's rappelled before, you've got to have two solid trunks in front of you, standing, pushing against that rock in order to make your descent successfully. He doesn't have a strong right leg, so he's got to compensate for that. He also doesn't have a strong right hand, so he's got to compensate for that. And he's right-handed. So amazing to watch this young man face this challenge and tackle that fear. I'm not even sure he had any fear in him, but he went right down that ledge, no problem. We actually had two routes set up. He tackled the first route a couple of times, no big deal. The second route was a little more challenging in its first few feet. You had to lean back over the edge, lower down to a small shelf, then reposition and drop one more time before you were finally on the rope and on the rappel. This presented a challenge for this young man because of the way that he had to handle his right leg. So it was suggested to him that maybe he starts just a little bit further to his left because the ledge wasn't quite as far down there. So that's what he did. But as soon as he lowered over that edge, the rope was coming back at an angle and it was putting more pressure on the right leg than normal. The right leg being the weak leg, and it pulled him out of balance and pulled him around, and he didn't have enough strength to push back against that rock with that leg and stop from falling. He fell to the side. Now he's tied into a rope. He's not falling down the cliff, but he fell over sideways and down just a little bit before the belay was able to stop him. And so now he's sideways on the side of this cliff. He's hit his side, he's hit his arm, he's really banged up. It really hurt him when he hit that rock, and he's scared at this point. He realizes things are not the way that they need to be. He realizes that things have gone wrong. He's not falling, but he doesn't have the ability to correct himself and get back on the wall, and he's really scared. His dad was watching this experience, as was I. The moment he fell, both of us sprang into action. His dad went right over the edge down to help his son, climbed down onto that little shelf to assess the situation and see what was needed. He didn't even think, right? This is what most fathers would do. My son is in danger. I'm going in. It doesn't really matter what I find on the other side of that ledge. I'm going down to help my son. He climbs down. No, not harnessed in, no ropes. He's free on the top of this cliff. This is about an 80-foot drop on this cliff. And he's on the outside of the edge, pushing his son back into the cliff, just making sure that he's safe and he's not going to fall any further. I'm just above him, over the edge as well, but I'm tied in with a rope. And things are going so quickly, it's one of those environments where you don't even really think about what's going on. You just react. We've got to help this young man, right? Once we assess the situation, we're able to tie him off with a secondary rope just to secure him, make sure that he can't fall anymore. In other words, no longer is a belay required. He's locked in And now we can work on lifting him up and getting him back up on top of this cliff. The whole time, none of us realizing that his father is not tied into a rope. Once we get the situation surveyed, the plan created, a secondary rope tied into him, we can breathe for the first time and realize this young man is okay. He's safe. He's going to be okay. And it was at that moment when I heard the father make a statement that I will never, ever, ever forget my entire life. In the most calm and collected voice, he looks up to me and the other guide that was on the belay and says very quietly, very calmly, "Guys, can I please get a bite on that rope?" And it took me a second to process what he meant. And then I realized he's standing on the top of this cliff, completely exposed with no safety rope. So we quickly, the rope he was asking for was under tension. We had to go untie another set to bring another rope over to be able to tie him in. So I ran, grabbed it, came back, tied everything off, reached down, clipped him in, tied him back to the rock, and he was safe. But the entire time he had been completely exposed without even thinking twice. That's a story of true heroicism in my mind, right? On both parts. That young man, the way he lives his life, the way he represents himself in light, in the face of all the challenges he's enduring in his life, he's a hero. I see him as a hero. His father that day showed heroicism as well in jumping to action, springing to action, and doing what was necessary to secure his son. But that message of getting a bite on the rope has lived in my mind ever since that moment. And as I liken that to what we do in business, in our business, as escrow officers and sales reps, the elite, we're trying to stand out. We've got long-term careers that we're trying to build. We want to service the top-notch professionals out there. So how does that relate? And so many things have flown through my mind back and forth as I've thought about that experience on the cliff that day. The question we need to ask ourselves, in what ways can we be a bite on the rope to our customers, right? The bite is what created the safety net for that dad, for that man, so that he could then relax, remove his focus from the peril that he was in and start focusing on his work ahead of him to get his son back up on top of the cliff. How does that relate to what we do in our business? A couple of thoughts that I might throw out there. From a transactional perspective, being aware of all your contract deadlines, right? You get a contract in from a customer, that's a hard-earned contract that customer fought for and bled for, and they hand it over to you to handle the preparation and closing of that deal. That's massive amounts of trust they have to put in us. So be aware of the deadlines on that contract. And if you're a high-producing escrow officer, you might have a couple hundred contracts at any given time that you've got to manage and watch. What is your system and process to keep track of all those deadlines? Communicate those back out to your professional or to your customer to help them stay on top of their game so that they can be able to go do what they do best, which is find and sell more transactions. Point out potential pitfalls that you see on a title report. There's a million of these. One example that comes to mind, what if you have a deceased person on title? Perhaps the realtor doesn't know about that. You see the contract is signed by one person, the title holder is another person because that person has passed away. Maybe it's that person's spouse that's signing. Maybe it's in a trust. Who knows? Depending on the situation, it merits a conversation with your realtor to let them know, hey, just so you know, I saw this. Title is held in this way. I saw the contract is signed this way. Can you give me the background of what's going on? And once you find out the details, then educate them on what is going to be necessary in order to process the transfer of that title. Very simple, but they're going to thank you all day long for taking the time to point that out, because who knows what they're going to have to gather and maybe even some legwork done before that transaction can close. Another potential example transactionally of becoming the bite on the rope for your customer. What if you have a payoff come in that exceeds the amount of the sales price of that property? You would hope the parties would be aware that that's going to take place. But what if they don't? And if you don't communicate that back until you sit down at the table to close, that could be a real problem that day. If you see a nuance in a file that you feel could create a pitfall, pick up the phone, call, text, communicate that situation to your client and let them tell you why everything's okay, or thank you that you brought that to their attention because they weren't aware of it. Transactionally, there's a lot of different ways you can be the safety net for your customer. What I'd like to spend a little more time on today that I feel is more important, how do you provide that on a much deeper level than just transactionally? How can you serve your customer in ways that you can help them grow their business and close more deals? Ultimately, that's the ultimate bite on the rope. They expect us to be good at what we do and how we close deals. But how can you help them find and close more deals on their end? A couple of thoughts that come to mind. Granted, this is not an exhaustive list. There's a million of these as well. Be creative. But a couple of thoughts that come to mind. Protect your customers from fraud, right? Protect your realtor from fraud. Protect the end consumer from fraud. Have great practices in place in your business that can detect fraud. This is a no-brainer anymore in terms of the title industry. We all have to be doing this on a daily basis, or else we will fall victim to this at some point in time. But I've heard it mentioned by a lot of local realtors in the past about how they appreciate that we help protect their transaction. That's really what we do. So recognize that's a value you bring to the table. Have good processes and procedures in place to help avoid those major transactional perils that could happen that those folks aren't aware of and don't even know what to do about. Another example would be keeping the transaction moving along with proactive updates. Be in constant communication with your customer, not in an overbearing way, but in a simple, concise way. Got the payoff in today, everything's looking good. We show the transaction deadline coming up or the settlement deadline coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll be in touch. Anything you need from us, please let us know. Those little touch points can be really helpful to keep your realtor at peace of mind so that they can continue being focused on what they do best, right? Another example, be an accountability partner to your customer, to your realtor, your loan officer. Build a relationship that's deep enough that they feel comfortable sharing their goals with you, and then provide that service of being their accountability partner. Help pave the way for them to achieve those goals. Build that relationship in a manner that they feel comfortable speaking to you about their progress toward their goals, seeking advice from you for those goals, and having you help push them in order to attain those goals. If you can achieve that with a customer, you're in pretty special territory, because that means they've let you into their inner circle. Here's another one. Make connections with other professionals that can help them level up and even provide more business to them. You can do this through workshops, you can do it through events, you can do it through mastermind groups. There's a lot of different settings, but be that organizer of relationships and connections that will help your customers grow in their influence and ultimately in the deal flow that they experience. Another one, provide valuable market insight. We in the title industry have access to great market insight. We get all kinds of data and reports on the regular. We know that the realtors do too through their channels, as do the loan officers through the mortgage channels. That's all good stuff, but they don't get it through the title channels. So share with them what you're learning on your end, just in case it fills a void or a hole that they might be getting in the reports that they receive. That's value to them. Another one, offer training to them on how your processes as an escrow officer can streamline their deal flow. I found it pretty common out there that our customers don't really know everything that we handle from A to Z in an escrow and in a title search, nor do they need to. But there are certain components that if they knew, we would be able to better work around one another and have a synergy with files as they go through the process from open to close. Take the opportunity to spend some time and train them on some of the important highlights that we see and that we deal with on our side of the coin. Not in a way that we want them to feel the pressure of it or to feel stress over it, but just to open their eyes as to what it is we do on our end. That way, their questions can be more meaningful. They can dive in on a deeper level and into what it is that we're facing when we handle their file. I think the ultimate fruit of this endeavor is to be able to have them understand that when we ask them a question, typically it's really important to us that we understand the answer to that question. They may not know why, but if they understand the level of detail that we have to work within in title and escrow, when we ask those important questions, they'll be more motivated to provide that answer to us so that we can keep things moving along quickly. At the end of the day, think of yourself as a peer to your customer, not as a commodity, not as a vendor. And if you can achieve that level, then that's when you start opening real doors for yourself. But if you think back to the story at the beginning of this message, think about that friend of mine that climbed over the edge of the cliff to save his son, not connected to a safety rope. And once he realized that, asked in a very humble way, could I please get a bite on that rope? How can we be the bite on the rope to our business? to the customers that we work with, to the people that we work with. There are so many opportunities here. If you think that through, find your answer for that and put it into motion, and you'll win. Good luck.